Hey nerds, Farmer Jesse here. Welcome to Growers Daily, your daily dose of ecological farming insight. It is Tuesday, March 18th, 2025, and today we're going to talk about harvesting legumes and where the nitrogen goes, wind, and the state of the citrus industry in America. So let's do it. All right, well, happy Tuesday, everyone. So yesterday was a soil blocking day here, getting more lettuce started, some parsley and cilantro, which I meant to do a couple weeks ago, honestly, but got distracted. Nothing super exciting. What is exciting is that spring is kind of in swing here, and by that I mean the temperatures are in swing. We were in t-shirt weather last week, then hoodie weather and raincoats this weekend and yesterday, followed by t-shirt weather in the coming days again, and more hoodies this upcoming weekend. Lots of swing. This is also the time of the most severe weather that we get all year, generally speaking, with high winds, not yet slowed down by all the leaves on the trees that themselves are not yet here. This weekend, when we were getting pummeled by rain, other places were also getting tornadoes and even worse winds. So hoping our farmer friends made it through that spell okay and make it through this spring well. Wind is just such a brutal element on farms. I've probably mentioned this before and will probably mention it a bunch in my lifetime, but I will take rain, lightning, snow, all of it over wind. I mean, I would prefer none of them in excess, but since I don't get that choice, I'd prefer all of them over wind. I think this is because wind isn't a 10 or 20 minute event. Like, it doesn't just happen and go away. Generally, we get a bad wind event and it can last all day long, all weekend, and it slowly pecks away at everything. It casually rips the tarps up, it puts pressure on the high tunnels and greenhouses, it throws stuff around, topples trees, grabs siding off of houses and sheets of metal off of barns. It's just a nuisance. And we've had years where we had multiple windstorms and one that finally crushed a caterpillar tunnel with 70 mile per hour winds. And there was just no getting anything done on those days, including being able to stop stressing. I usually just collapse from exhaustion the next day of just being tense for however long the wind is going. Simultaneously, as is most things in farming, wind is both obnoxious and difficult to deal with, and wildly important, at least ecologically speaking. The giant sequoias of the West Coast, for instance, rely heavily on phosphorus that blows in from the Gobi Desert across the Pacific, while North America and the Amazon are both partially fertilized by wind blowing nutrient-rich dust from the Sahara onto our continents. And I specifically remember a weekend in 2020 where I was at market and could see the dust from the Sahara from a mega dust storm they called Godzilla. The dust from there also helps to trigger blooms of phytoplankton in the ocean that feeds whales and such, but also sequesters carbon. More generally, wind distributes seeds and pollen. Wind can improve photosynthesis, while too much wind may cause poor photosynthesis and increased evapotranspiration, which can dry out plants and soil. But wind itself is also changing, which is fun. For a while, scientists believed we were headed towards a global stilling. With the warming poles, the speed at which wind would be moving was decreasing, but also contradicting that idea, researchers found that wind increased from 2010 to 2020 or something. But also, they are finding a lot of variability in wind speeds over the last 15 plus years, but are predicting more stilling in the future. It's obviously not settled science, but researchers seem to agree that wind patterns are changing somewhat dramatically, which could have a long-term effect on ecology, but also wind power generation, photosynthesis, among other things. Anyway, all that to say, I feel like wind is one of those enigmatic things we are constantly dealing with, but not really thinking about in terms of its effect on ecology and farms. It's something we need. It's also something we can hate because it's obnoxious. So shouts to wind, but also shouts at wind, I guess. I will probably do more talking on wind in the future, especially as we learn more and more about what the heck it's doing globally. Anyway, thoughts on wind? Interesting research you stumbled upon? Let me know. And otherwise, we'll take a quick break. And when we come back, nitrogen and fava beans. BRB.
I'm driving in my car, the road is long and full of dust. The landscape changes around me, on and on, I feel immersed.
Today's episode of Growers Daily is brought to you by Sow Right Seeds. So Right Seeds is an heirloom seed company that offers fresh, high-quality, open-pollinated seeds. They have a great selection on their website of over 400 varieties, along with a planter's library with tips for growing. They offer cover crops and bulk packs of seed for sustainable home gardening. The instructions on the back of their packets have all the information you need to get started. Go to So Right Seeds, that's S-O-W, and use my discount code NOTILL for 15% off your order. That's SoRightSeeds.com. Today's episode is also brought to you by Tilth Soil. Tilth Soil is a worker-owned co-op making living soils in Cleveland, Ohio using NOP-compliant food scrap compost. They wrote us, quote, "We're stoked to support growers daily because healthier, tastier, and generally more decent food systems start with growers like all of you, inquiring minds who care about the land." End quote. Love the folks over there at Tilth. If you're looking for top-notch compost or potting mix, drop an email to the folks at Tilth via info@tilthsoil.com. That's info@tilthsoil.com. All right, enjoy the show. If you, the listener, are enjoying this content, getting even a small amount of value from it, consider supporting our work over at patreon.com/no-till-growers. I will try to get to questions from everywhere the questions come in, but I will always get to your Patreon questions. Now, today's Patreon question comes from Patreon member Dan Gorman, who writes, quote, "Hey, Jesse, thanks for these great podcasts. I'm curious about your thoughts on using overwintered fava beans for soil fertility and early spring variety to complement typical spring crops. I'm in Wisconsin, so I'm wondering for colder climates if it could help set up a greenhouse for a follow-on crop of summer vegetables by improving soil nitrogen." End quote. Okay, Dan, great question. So the answer here depends on if you hope to harvest the favas or if you just want to use them as a cover crop. Now, not that you are doing this here, but just speaking in general, one of the things that often gets confused about legumes and specifically nitrogen is that, yes, legumes are wonderful for fixing nitrogen, but if the plants senesce, that is to say, they create finished beans or peas or whatever and finish their life cycle, then they are not leaving much nitrogen behind. The nitrogen has been converted to proteins and such that are now contained in the bean or pea. Let's take our Three Sisters conversation from yesterday. People often assume that the beans are sharing their nitrogen, but that is not really the case. Legumes are creating a lot of their own nitrogen, or well, bacteria and tiny symbiosomes, tiny nodules on their roots are creating the nitrogen or fixing it. But anyway, they are fixing a lot of their own nitrogen and thus perhaps not using as much free nitrogen in the soil, but they are not sharing what that nitrogen they fix with other crops, really. They are only sharing it, quote unquote, if they are cut back and die, and then the nitrogen fixed in their little nodules, assuming that the proper rhizobium bacteria are present, slowly gets released back into the soil for other plants to utilize. And in fact, there are examples of indigenous Americans overplanting, planting too many of their beans and then cutting some of them back, which in turn would free up some of the nitrogen for other crops. Anyway, returning to our favas, also called fabas or broad beans, among other names, if you were to overwinter them and then harvest them, you are effectively harvesting a lot of that nitrogen. Now, if you do not harvest them and rather work those materials in whatever plant material left into the soil, then you are effectively feeding the soil for the next crop, which in that case, that is where you will get the most benefits in terms of nitrogen. Is there no benefit to growing the bean and then harvesting it? Not necessarily. Not to use too many double negatives there, but not necessarily. There is always a benefit to living plant roots. They gather and feed microbes all winter, pump some carbon into the soil. Favas are also equipped with a strong taproot that can break up compaction. It's not a bad thing. It just isn't going to prep the soil nutritionally for the next crop. And again, specifically in terms of nitrogen. Of course, fava beans are absolutely delicious and could be a great crop to have going into the spring for sure. They are a bit of a pain to prep in the kitchen, but in my opinion, they have some of the best flavors of any legume. Favas could certainly add something fun to a spring CSA mix or perhaps market table. If you were just trying to increase nutrition in the soil for the next year, though, perhaps just a field pea cover crop or something like that grown through December and then allowed to die in January would be a better bet. I think it's B. And it would likely be cheaper in terms of seed cost. But I should say now I kind of want a salad with favas in it. Sounds delicious. Anyway, I hope that was helpful. I hope this also doesn't discourage you from growing favas because favas rule. Let me know what your all's experiences have been with favas. Otherwise, we're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, what can we learn as small growers or people in the world from the citrus industry? Be right back. Today's episode of Growers Daily is brought to you by Harnwah Greenhouses. Harnwah Greenhouses has pioneered controlled environment agriculture since 1965, partnering with market gardeners and farmers across North America to deliver turnkey greenhouse solutions. Their unwavering mission is to support growers' success through innovation and expertise in design, manufacturing, and installation. Harnwah Greenhouses are engineered to withstand high wind and snow loads, providing optimal brightness, increased yields, rapid ROI, and long-lasting durability. With over 20,000 projects completed, they are more than a manufacturer. They are a trusted partner. Their structures foster sustainable, energy-efficient ecosystems that drive profitable, resilient agriculture. In 2025, Harnwah is introducing a new low-tech, high-tunnel model starting at just $2 per square foot, offering open field growers an accessible entry into controlled environment agriculture. Learn more at harnwah.com. That's HARNOIS.com. All right, back to the show. So the other day I was checking in on Florida's orange groves because sometimes I fantasize about buying a citrus grove where I can spend my winters tending my citrus trees and then send citrus up to my friends all over the East Coast. That's a thing that I do. But anyway, I was checking in on the state of the oranges industry, and I came across an article from the Associated Press called "Hit by Storms and Disease, Florida's Citrus Growers Try to Survive Until Bug-Free Trees Arrive," where they summarize, quote, "Population growth, hurricanes, and a vicious citrus greening disease have left the Florida orange industry reeling. Consumers are drinking less orange juice. Citrus growers are folding up their operations in the state, and the major juice company Tropicana is struggling to stay afloat. With huge numbers of people moving into Florida's orange growing areas, developers are increasingly building homes on what were once orange groves," end quote. They write soberly that this combo has contributed to like a 90% decline in orange production over the past 20 years. And I'm no mathematician, but 90% is a big old number. To back up, citrus fruit, by and large, is not the best position to thrive anyway. What I mean is that citrus, and in particular the popular citruses that we think of, such as oranges and lemons, etc., grown in a very specific climate. We call it the citrus belt. So already this commodity is at quite a disadvantage because not only is it somewhat limited in terms of where it can be grown, but it is also somewhat limited in terms of being, limited to one of the harshest places to grow, the tropics and the warmer subtropics, where things like hurricanes and tropical storms have always been more or less a given and are now getting stronger and stronger and happening faster and faster, at least in Florida and Texas, where much of the country's citrus is produced. Or it was. Now, California and to a lesser extent Arizona are taking over that mantle of the biggest citrus producing states. Another disadvantage, so to speak, is that citrus is slow into production. It can take 8 years from seed or up to 5 years from graft to get a decent harvest from a single citrus tree. So if anything should go wrong, recovery is slow. And certainly with weather events like hurricanes, things go wrong. In particular, if a tree is defoliated by the wind or breaks or something, it can take a year or more to recover from that event. Then, of course, you have the whole monoculture thing, where these groves are just like 1 or 2 species for acres and acres, which if I was going to set up a feast for disease and pests, that's exactly how I would do it. Like just put the same thing all in one place, boom. That is just, it's a beautiful recipe for something to just devour them. But my working assumption here is that feeding the pests and disease is not the goal. The goal is to presumably produce an admittedly delicious commodity for humans, not pests or diseases. Unfortunately, the result has been the opposite, especially with the citrus greening disease, which spread on a little sap-sucking insect, has now spread further west into other states. The real estate factor devouring the citrus groves is really a matter of political will. Basically, states have to decide whether they want their state to produce food or provide real estate. And increasingly, food is losing out. Millions and millions of acres of land all over the country have been lost to development in the last 20 years, with hundreds of millions more expected to go in the next 20. Then some large percentage of that developed land goes unused or gets abandoned, as much as 10 to 15% in some urban areas. But the studies vary, and it depends a little bit on the city and the geographic location, but a lot. There are zoning laws and such that protect farmland, but not enough, and not enough usage laws that should require unused urban land to be developed or redeveloped before any new building permits are issued. For the time being, places like California and Arizona are supplying much of the citrus for the nation. So I guess to some extent, the state of citrus is the state of most agriculture in the U.S. right now. We're using our farmland in incredibly risky ways and then losing it to development. What could go wrong? Anyway, I think I'm going to leave it there on that positive note. Don't forget, we are now officially a 501c3, so donations to no-till growers are tax deductible and greatly appreciated. You can click the link in the show notes for that. Enormous thank you to all of our show sponsors. Huge shouts to Willie Breeding for the theme music and to the team at No-Till Growers, including our longtime editor, Michael Sellis, who does freelance editorial work for podcasts and etc. So if you've got one and you need an editor, learn more at sellissoundworks.co. I will link that in the show notes. Also, shouts to Epidemic Sound for the background music that you can hear. Pick up a copy of the Living Soil Handbook or the Seed Farmer at no-tillgrowers.com to support our work. Also, shouts to Pam Dalling for the Sustainable Market Farmer coming out. I just got my physical copy. This is a tome. Like I think every farmer needs to own a copy of this thing because it is just like a massive. I knew there was a lot of new information in this updated edition, but like I didn't because I'd read it, but I read it online, so I didn't realize it was like this much. It is awesome. So shouts to Pam for that. Big thank you to everyone over at patreon.com/no-till-growers, where at a certain level, or if you just bump up from one level to another, or you sign up in the month of March, you get a shout out in the show. So big shout outs today to Molly Theda. I think that's right. Jennifer Clark, Bill Price. These were our earthworms from last month. And Victoria Stormdahl. Stormdahl, yeah. And anyway, this is the story of a group of botanists who discover a special plant, like an unknown plant, and it's in the middle of like a crater, and presumably from an asteroid. But they discover this plant, and usually, and it's like glowing, and it looks really interesting, and it's like nothing they've ever seen before. And usually, this is where in the story that they would get like a superpower or something, right? Like this is we've been here before, but that's not what happens. What happens is that they just feel really calm and relaxed around it, which is nice, but also it's exactly what the plant wanted. And our story begins. Otherwise, you all have a great rest of your Tuesday. We will see you tomorrow for Wednesday. Yep. All right. Thanks for watching and/or listening. Bye.